Hey guys, here we are on our second podcast right now. It's going to be a big key issues packet here. You can even see that with your key issues packet, in the section on site and situation factors in industry. Going to be quite lengthy. So what I'd like to do is start up with the podcast and start talking about the site portion of the site and situation factors in industry. When we talk about site, it's the characteristics of a place and how they directly relate to the three factors of production. So there's two things you want to note about site. One is it's the characteristics of a place, and that is can be used anywhere. For example, where a city is created, it's based on its site. It's the characteristics of a place. It might have fertile land. It might have level land to build upon. It might have natural defense boundaries, such as mountains surrounding it, or a body of water that's next to it. Again, this is what we're talking about with the characteristics of a place. How this ties in with industry is we take it a step further by saying that site is the characteristics of a place, and how these characteristics directly relate to the three factors of production. There's technically four factors of production in the world of economics, you guys. One of them is entrepreneurship, which is the risk-reward asset that people have. Again, with people being able to create new ideas. If you're entrepreneurial, you come up with new ideas and you'll be able to create something. That does not have a relationship to site right now. So when we talk about site, we're talking about basically the other three factors of production, which I have listed right here with A, B, and C, starting with labor, then capital, and land. So when we have the four factors of production in economics, we are talking about labor, we're talking about land, we're talking about capital, we're talking about human resources, or labor as we call it, and entrepreneurship. Again, entrepreneurship does not fit into the category of site, though. Now, talking about the characteristics of a place, the characteristics of a location, and how these characteristics directly relate to the three factors of production in order for industry, manufacturing, or just in general sense, economics to happen. When we talk about labor, this is the most important site factor on a global scale. Okay, so the first thing I want you to put down is labor, you guys. Before I talk about what it is and what it does, please note that it's the most important site factor on a global scale. You just even look at it, there's more to say about labor than the other two that we're going to mention. So it's the most important site factor on a global scale in regards to the total amount of potential workers versus the labor cost paid to each individual worker. So essentially, when we're talking about labor here right now, what we're really considering is the total amount of potential workers that can be found in said given area or in said given site, or we could be looking at the labor cost paid to each individual worker there. So two things that we're looking at with labor, why it's so important, you guys. One is, depending upon the site, the potential or the number of potential workers that could work in industry versus also the number of laborers who are paid out in regards to money. So versus labor costs paid to each individual worker. So two things you got to consider. Now, when we talk about profit, you guys, remember when we talk about labor cost, we're talking about how much each worker is paid, you guys, or the total amount that each worker within a particular industry is paid. So what you're trying to do here, okay, is you want workers to be there to do the work. That's stating the obvious. But you also want to pay them, again, in the world of economics, I'm not saying Mr. Critchley agrees with this, but you also are talking about paying them at a lower amount as well. So if you have a lot of laborers in a given area and they're willing to work for less, what that's going to do is it's going to increase the profits for the companies. And you'll be taking economics as seniors. Some of you are taking it right now. And you're talking about supply and demand, and you're talking about consumers and producers, buyers and sellers. Well, the producers or the sellers, for them, it's all about the profit, you guys. That's that end line baseline numbers that they're worried about. When we consider profit, remember, we're talking about revenue, which is the total money generated from the sale of a product, versus subtracted from cost. And that's how we get profit. So we take the total amount of money that's gathered from the selling of the particular product, and then you subtract the cost that it took to make that product. That is your profit. And if it's the other way around, then it's considered to be a loss. But right now we're talking about profits. So a lower cost means a higher profit, essentially, you guys. So if you're able to pay your workers less money, what they're saying here, in theory, in regards to site, is one, you need people there to do the work, but if you can pay them at a lower cost, that's going to create a greater difference between the revenue and the cost, thus increasing your profits in theory. I know there's a big debate about that right now in regards to how much workers should be paid, especially with the minimum wage debate that's going on, how much you should increase it by. So that's a different topic for a different day. I'm just simply telling you right now, you guys, when you consider site, you consider the amount of workers available, and you consider how much they're willing to work for. You have to consider those two things. Now, the cost of labor varies across the world. And that's one thing we want to point out here. There's essentially 500 million people who work in industry, you guys, and that's where it says 500 million industrial workers. So there's 500 million people who work in some sort of industrial related field. China has 1/4 of the world's manufacturing workers, or 1/4 of the industrial workers. India has another fourth of the industrial workers, and then 1/5 goes out to the developed countries of the world. So the other developed countries of the world. So what we're looking at here, we're going to talk about a concept that we mentioned when we talked about globalization way back in, I think it might have even been chapter 1. It's called outsourcing. This is any decision or an attempt to send a portion of an industry's work overseas, or a company's work that's sent overseas. And that's what you can put down for outsourcing. In this case, it would be an industry sending a portion of its work to be done overseas, you guys, or you can just simply say it's when a company sends work to be done overseas. What are they trying to do when they do that, you guys? Essentially, what they look at is places like China and India have a lot of workers, because there's a lot of work being completed for example, Nike is very large in Hong Kong or in China. And again, they can pay the workers, or they do pay the workers, less money there than they do here in the States. And what they try to do then is they try to make more shoes at less cost, you guys, which will create a greater difference between their revenue, increasing a higher profit like we talked about before. So when we talk about outsourcing, again, sending a portion of the work to be done overseas, big reason why they're hoping that they can do that is they're hoping that they can find basically a less expensive labor cost, which is going to increase profits again. I mentioned that several times over. So it must be pretty important. China and India, you guys, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about lowering cost and keeping revenue the same, which is going to increase your profits. China and India, their average pay is around $1 an hour, in comparison to $35 an hour here in the United States. So when we talk about this industrial worker, on average in China and India, make about $1. If we're going to put it in U.S. currency, it's about $1 an hour in comparison to $35 an hour here in the United States. A huge difference, you guys, in regards to the revenue and the cost, depending upon where you are producing these products. Now, one of the things that we'll keep talking about, you guys, when we talk about labor, we're going to sometimes talk about a labor-intensive industry. This is an industry in which the wages and other compensation paid out is the largest expense in the production. So again, to put that in layman's term, labor-intensive industry simply means that labor costs are going to be the most expensive portion of the manufacturing of a particular product. So the labor cost is going to be the highest or the most expensive amount when we're talking about manufacturing of a product. And so we refer to that as a labor-intensive industry, when the highest percentage of the cost goes into the workers when you're talking about manufacturing or making a product. The United States, 11% of total manufacturing done in this country, you guys, goes into labor cost. And so when we talk about the United States, we're talking about the amount of workers available and then the amount that you have to pay the workers. You're going to look at labor intensive. 11% of total manufacturing cost, or the manufacturing of a product, on average, goes into labor here in the United States. Now, labor intensive is not the same as high wage industry. That's a question in your key packet as well, so you probably want to really listen up to this piece right here. A labor intensive industry is not the same as a high wage industry. All I have to really do is provide you with an example to kind of explain that a little bit. But essentially what we're saying is, if we look at the textile industry, the greatest percentage of the cost goes into the labor, okay? So we're talking about textile industry, making a shirt, for example. The greatest amount of money goes into the laborer who's making that shirt. Okay, but they may receive only $12 an hour, but it's still labor intensive due to the fact that the supplies to make that shirt are less than that $12 an hour that the laborer is getting to come up with the making of that shirt. So labor cost is still going to be labor intensive in the textile industry because the highest percentage of the cost of that manufactured product is going into labor. All right, where with auto industry, for example, the greatest cost goes into all the parts to build the automobile or to build the car or the SUV or the pickup. So with the auto industry, the greatest cost doesn't go into labor. It actually goes into all the parts and all the materials needed to build the car. All right. However, an average auto worker here in this country, you guys, again, just talking about average pay for auto workers in the United States, is about $42 an hour. So high wage industry is the auto industry because they're paying a worker $42 an hour, but it's not necessarily labor intensive because the greatest percentage of the cost goes into the parts and the materials used to make the car, not the laborer that's putting the car together. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions on that, make sure you check with me, you guys, because I want you to understand that labor-intensive industry is talking about the highest percentage of one cost going into making of a product is involved with the workers. That's labor-intensive. High-wage industry, essentially, it can be labor-intensive, but it doesn't have to be, and that's what we're trying to tell you right there, where again, the textile industry is a great example of labor intensive, but it's really only paying the workers $12 an hour. In comparison to the auto industry, where the greatest percentage of the cost goes into materials, and a lower percentage goes into the labor for the making of one particular car or automobile, or again, whatever you want to call it. So again, when we talk about that, make sure you can differentiate between the two. Labor intensive and high wage industry do not always go hand in hand. That might be a good true and false question on the test. Capital. When we talk about capital, you guys, what we're really talking about, capital is everything that goes into the manufacturing of a product. Okay, most of the time it can be materials, it can be tools, but most of the time when people refer to capital, they're talking about the startup money needed for the manufacturing process to take place. So when we talk about capital, we're talking about basically the startup money to get the manufacturing of a certain product to take place. So again, it's that startup money or startup possessions that you need to make manufacturing become a go. Michigan. We talk about Michigan in regards to that. Oh, okay, I almost forgot. We talk about capital again, you guys. We're talking about that startup money again to allow for manufacturing to take place. It shouldn't surprise you guys, when businesses or industries start up, they go and they basically get a huge loan so they can acquire everything they need to make their finished product. Well, it only makes sense that a lot of these places are going to start up in a location of whoever gave them the loan. That's one of the things that we're looking at. So when we talk about capital, a lot of times industries or factories, their location is based upon who is their primary lender, allowing them to have their particular manufacturing plant or industry or factory, whatever you want to talk about, actually be up and running. So Michigan's a perfect example of this. I think many of you know that Michigan is oftentimes considered to be the car-producing state. All right, for a long time, Detroit, Michigan, making a resurgence. It's had some tough years, but Detroit, Michigan has been the long-time car capital of the world. So when we talk about Michigan as a major car-producing state, you guys, the reason why it's in Michigan, to be quite honest with you, now, you could talk about near proximity to the Great Lakes. You could talk about the proximity with iron ore and the making of steel. This all holds true. But another reason is because of the site of the lender who is willing to borrow, all right, the automakers the money to basically manufacture automobiles. And the same holds true for the Silicon Valley. Again, in the Silicon Valley, if you guys didn't know about that, that's kind of like that's the computer and other high-tech industries that exist. You guys, the majority or a large percentage of our high-tech industries take place in the Silicon Valley. The reason why is because the lenders in that region were more willing to give high-tech industries a substantial loan than in other areas of the country. So next to the Silicon Valley, you can simply put down that lenders within this location were more willing to borrow to high-tech industries than in other parts of the United States, than in other regions of the United States. And that's why the Silicon Valley has so many high-tech industries. Do note this, though. I think it's kind of interesting. Your book points it out, and they want us to enforce it as well. When we talk about high-tech industries such as computer and other high technological type of industries, you guys, they're very risky business. And that's what I want you to write down next to high-tech industries. It's a very risky business. And your book goes on. I know you don't like the minutia of the little details that go with this, but I think it is important. And it's a risky business, as 2/3 of them usually end up failing. All right. So a larger percentage of high-tech industries are going to fail rather than succeed. And if you're a lender, that's a huge risk, because if it ends up failing, it declares, again, corporate bankruptcy of some sort, or company declares bankruptcy. Again, you're not going to get your investment back. In fact, you could end up losing money. But in the Silicon Valley, they were more willing to take a chance on this sort of thing. So in regards to high-tech industries, it's a very risky business, which a lot of people don't know. And again, more often than not, it's going to fail. In fact, 2/3 rate of high-tech industries failing versus succeeding. The Silicon Valley financial institutions, I've already talked about them. They were more willing to take that risk, and that's what you can write down again, is that they were more willing to take the risk. So when you think of the Silicon Valley up here, sorry about that, you're thinking of high-tech industries. This is where we have computers and other technological equipment that's being produced, you guys. Understanding that high-tech industries is a very risky investment. If it pays off, it really pays off. But if it does fail, you usually end up losing a substantial amount of money. And that's a very risky thing for a lender. The Silicon Valley financial institutions within that region were more willing to lend to high-tech industries than in other parts of the country, which we've already talked about. 1/4 of all capital is spent within, 1/4 of all high-tech capital is spent within the Silicon Valley. So there is a lot of money invested in this region, you guys. Moving on in regards to that, developing countries, okay, find it more challenged to be given capital for industrial expansion. I don't think that's something we mentioned with development, and that's why we went chapter 9 and then zoom back to chapter 11, or zoom forward to chapter 11 right here. Because with developing countries, we find it more challenging for them to raise the capital for industrial expansion. So it's kind of a chicken before the egg type of thing. They need money to make money, okay? And they need to make money so they have money so they can expand. So developing countries really struggle with the raising of capital for industries. And we did mention that a little bit in the last chapter that we covered in chapter 9. Last but not least, when we talk about the 3 factors of production, so we talked about human resources, or simply laborers. We talked about capital, again, everything that's needed to start up some sort of industry to make a finished product, you guys. Most of the time we're talking about startup money in order to do that. And you also need to have land, okay? When we talk about land, we're talking about the land itself, okay? We're actually talking about the land that you need in order to place your factory on it. We're talking about the acreage that's needed, the space that's needed. So we're talking about the land itself, but we're also talking about the natural resources on that land. So when we refer to land, we're talking about the land itself and the natural resources that can be found on that land. So the land itself and the natural resources that can be found on that land. And when we talk about natural resources, most of the time we're thinking oil, we're thinking coal, we're thinking about mineral wealth, we're thinking about things like that. We also can be looking at the fact when we talk about any sort of resource there. Remember, when we talk about rivers, you guys, this is an early form of energy and transportation. So this was a very, very important factor of production in regards to where the industries were going to be, because initially you needed some sort of water source because it was used for both energy and transportation. So rivers, you guys, were used extensively, you can put down, for both energy and transportation in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. Later on, and I mentioned this before when we talked about the Industrial Revolution, the railroad's going to become more prevalent, which basically, you guys, it allowed for factories to move further and further away from bodies of water, to develop more space. Again, it would give them more space because they wouldn't be so crowded with other settlements and civilizations that are living next to that major body of water. So they gave it more space in regards to more land to build upon, but probably more importantly with the railroads, you guys, it allowed for a more efficient and in some cases less expensive means of transporting products from one area to another. So it was more efficient and less expensive transportation process of sending products from one area to another area. In regards to cities, this will be the last thing we talked about. Excellent site. So we could be talking about the city and the land that it's built upon. It's an excellent site due to the fact that you have a lot of consumers willing to buy the product, and you guys, that there was a lot of people that you could potentially hire to help make the product. So when we talk about cities, and again, why you see more industries in cities, there's many different reasons, but one of them, or the two biggest reasons, would be that's the market where more people are going to buy your product. Again, if you're in a city, there's more people to buy your product, and there's the potential to hire more workers too to make the product. So that's what you'd want to put down in regards to that. This is part one, and this might actually be there might be three parts to this site situation. We just focused on site today, you guys. So again, when we talked about site, you wrote this down in your book, and you talked about how it's the characteristics of a place. It's all the characteristics of a place. And in regards to industry, it's how these characteristics relate to the three factors of production. So we spent a lot of time talking about land, labor, and capital today. And all those things factor in regards to site. And we kind of closed up with land and labor coming together when we mentioned the reasons for why so many factories are found in cities. Again, it creates a market of people who are willing to buy the product, or more people willing to buy the product, you guys, and if you don't have to ship it, it's going to be cheaper in regards to that, and also creates a potential to hire more laborers to make that product. Again, in order to do that, you're going to need to expand, which is where capital kicks in. So we're talking about the distribution of industries, you guys, basically based on site, or the characteristics of why it was an attractive place to start your manufacturing of your product there. When we come back tomorrow or later in the day, we're going to talk about situation, and we'll talk about how, and again, I'm not going to get into it at this particular moment, but this deals more with, when we talk about situation, deals more about the location of a place in relation to another place, and why it's better to build there than it is somewhere else. And we'll talk more about that in our next podcast, or our next outline that we have. We might even do it tomorrow in class. With that being said, that's part one of Key Issue 2. It's a big portion of the next test on Chapter 11 Industry. With that, I just wish you well, and we'll see you tomorrow.